Alright guys, welcome to this video which I'm going to make about the latest on the Renault Nissan Mitsubishi alliance. So just yesterday, the 6th of February 2023, there was a press conference which made it official about the new restructuring that's happening within that alliance. So let's go back to the late 90s when these were individual companies, and then about 1998 Nissan got into a lot of trouble financially and were on the verge of liquidation, which is when Renault came in and bought a lot of shares in Nissan. Nissan also did get a few shares in Renault, but for the longest time up to this point, there was a big imbalance between those shares because Renault had 43%, Nissan had about 15%. Okay, and then over the years, Nissan bought Mitsubishi, which also then fell within the alliance. Now, from 1998, Nissan recovered a lot with the help of Carlos Ghosn, the Renault CEO at the time, who was then also heading up the alliance. So as they recovered, and with the markets which Nissan operate in, which is a big part of the North American market as well as Japan, Europe, Africa, Middle East, they have a big segment. So naturally over time they sales actually were better than Renault, and this is going back to pretty much a decade or so now. And as you can imagine, a lot of frustrations grew around why Renault still have that majority share. So I mean, you can balance that up into, Nissan got themselves in trouble and Renault came to their aid. So that argument doesn't always fly, but it is what it is, right? And like I said, up till yesterday it was made official that the restructuring happened and each of the companies now have an equal shareholding in the alliance. Okay, it's all at 15%. But from Renault's perspective, you don't just sell all of those shares and make things balanced without having some sort of benefit to your long-term success. And we know that the car market is now quite volatile. There's a lot of change going to electrification, hybrid power, and there's a lot of pressure from governments to make sure that you don't cause environmental damage, making sure that the way you're sourcing your natural resources to conduct your operations is now within certain limits. So this is where Renault's new it's going to sort of take off still, but they have been quite a backlog of items which they wanted to introduce going forward in order to get Renault up to the level where they feel it should be. And they're launching a program called Ampere, which is essentially, if what I understand correctly from what the CEO had mentioned yesterday, is their number one focus going into the future. So it's basically a whole host of projects which will be majority on electric vehicles and possibly other types of renewable energies, right? But this is Renault's pathway into the future. And part of them selling the shares was involving Nissan and Mitsubishi to have some sort of involvement into this Ampere program, right? Because they have capabilities which Renault don't have within their own company. So this is where that alliance benefits, or hopefully the benefits kick in, and that Renault can get some sort of expertise from Nissan and from Mitsubishi to buy into the Ampere program and then to offer some of the services which they specialize in to make the program better. And I believe Nissan can have somewhere up to 7% or something like that involvement into it. So that's the most that they can sort of buy into the program. It may be more than 7%. I think 10 or 15, I can't be 100% sure, but Nissan have sort of agreed to go up to that level. Okay, now one of the big things which the Renault CEO had mentioned was being this as Renault's number one program going forward, they have to be the majority shareholder into this program, right? Which makes sense. I mean, this is their do or die kind of effort going into the future. Nissan, on the other hand, have a lot of effort being put into solid state batteries. So their vehicles going forward, and this is surprisingly quite um, a well-known fact over the last few years. I mean, in your cell phones, in most um, battery operated products, we know that solid state batteries are much more uh, performant, they're much more reliant, and have a lower impact on the environment. So it's all around a better battery technology. But in cars, it's not really something that's taken off. So Nissan is actually, like I say, surprisingly one of the first companies that's really going to put a concerted effort into um, the solid state batteries. Okay, so before we continue with what happened with the restructuring and the Ampere program, let's just go back to a timeline which I found around the alliance, right? So we're going back to 1996, and I'll share the article in the video description, so if you guys want to have a look, then you can do so. Okay, so it starts off in 1996 when Carlos Ghosn joined Renault as the executive vice president. And this was a time when Renault was in also a bit of difficulty, and he was nicknamed actually Le Cost Killer, right? Ellie Cost Killer. That's the Ellie is French, obviously, so they termed him that because he had a reputation of, quite aggressively laying off staff and closing down operations that were non-performant, right? So he sort of, brought a lot of compactness to an organization in order to get the maximum profit. And this is something key that Nissan failed with horrendously in the 90s, 80s, even before that. They would just expand and expand and expand, at times not even knowing where the operations would lie. So that's one of the big things why Nissan actually got into a lot of trouble in the 90s. Alright, so we're going now to 1999. This is when Renault actually came to the aid of Nissan. So I mentioned 1998, it's actually 1999. Okay, so this is when Renault came to the aid of Nissan and essentially bought a whole lot of shares into Nissan in order to give them the financial backing which they needed. Alright, then in the year 2000, Carlos Ghosn also became the CEO of Nissan. So now he was heading up both companies, Renault and Nissan. In 2002, Nissan announced it has a 3-year plan targeting an increase of 1 million units in global sales by the mid-2000s. Alright, now when the mid-2000s came around, Nissan actually missed its global sales target. So that million units which they tried to get sell didn't actually materialized. However, they did get a lot of value in the company, so there were signs of improvements coming. So this is where Carlos Ghosn's sort of philosophy actually started paying off, and they didn't reach a target, but there was an upward curve in that company. Okay, and then we can skip 2006, 2008. Nissan announces a 5-year GT 2012 plan, and this is to focus on investment. But then the financial crisis was a hit, and this has affected all the automakers, and actually a lot of them had to cancel off their plans. Nissan was one of the companies that done it. But you'll see, even with the financial crisis, this alliance actually done better than most. It even beat Toyota, VW, all those big companies. And actually, at one point, Renault Nissan was the #1 automaker in the world in terms of sales. So that was pretty amazing to think of where they came from to what they actually achieved, which is why a lot of people still have that respect for Carlos Ghosn, even though he got into a lot of trouble in that. When it came to heading up a company and making sure it's moving in the right direction, he was key to that. Okay, but there's obviously something which he done, which was bad. But if you look at CEOs in these billion-dollar companies, it's pretty mild. Okay, and the actual reason why he was ousted from the organization and got himself in a bit of witch hunt was due to some tensions that happened with him and Nissan, and the plan that he had with Renault and Nissan, wanting them to be sort of more closely operated partners and sort of one company. Nissan obviously didn't like that at all, and that's quite a interesting thing, but we can talk about that in another video. Alright, so in 2012, Nissan focused on growing up its market share in the US. Obviously, Nissan are massive in the US. Renault, on the other hand, don't have pretty much any presence in the United States, okay, North America in general. Okay, then in 2013, and this is where, if you pay attention to the vehicles that Renault and Nissan actually make, you'd notice that a lot of similarities started coming with the vehicles. For example, the Clio and the Micra. And if you look inside those cars, you'll see so many of the components are shared. Okay, and so in 2013 they announced the Common Module Family (CMF) platform in shorter terms, and this is something the Alliance still up to this day, even going into the MPR program, they always talk about the CMF. So it stands for Common Module Family, and this is where they have different platforms, and each platform is responsible for making certain vehicles. So your sort of sedans, your hybrids, sorry, not your hybrids, your sedans, your SUVs, your one-ton bakkies, which is something that Renault and Nissan's agreed to have a joint venture. So that's another vehicle that will come out in the coming years, but that was also announced in yesterday's meeting. Okay, so 2013 is actually when they announced this Common Module Family platform, and there's a massive investment that went into it, right? But by 2016, there was a lot of benefits coming out of this, and seeing that the joint efforts are paying off. Okay, then we go to 2016. This is where Mitsubishi was obviously in a lot of trouble, even the years before that, but this is when Nissan actually decided to take a controlling stake in Mitsubishi Motors. So this is important, right? Because Nissan was taking the controlling stake and not Renault. So these are like where the problems actually come in, because now you have an alliance, but then each member's kind of doing its own thing, which, it can be a good thing, right? If every company sort of does its own sort of research, its own development, but sort of brings it back together so that the other members can share off a bit. Whereas in this Mitsubishi deal, it was just Nissan going on their own merry way and getting a share in Mitsubishi, but there was nothing in it for Renault, right? And you've seen even recently, it's kind of switched, because I think there's a lot of respect which has come in from Mitsubishi to Renault, because they've actually used a lot of Renault's CMF platforms and have had some good results from that financially. Whereas Mitsubishi to Nissan, I don't think it's actually worked out quite well for Mitsubishi at all, if you ask me. But again, we'll talk about those politics in another video when we look into more detail about the alliance and the relationships between the three companies. Alright, so in 2017, Gozan said he'll step down as CEO of Nissan in April to focus on improving profitability at Renault and ensuring the alliance is irreversible after he retires. Now this is very, very important, because this is where the pressure started coming in. So Nissan started out selling Renault, and obviously Mitsubishi were a very small player, but Nissan were the guys that were bringing in the money, right, to the alliance. And a lot of that is because of Gozan and the way he put traction to that company. But there's a lot of politics in Japan which they didn't like the plans of Gozan trying to bring these companies together, right? Because now, hey, hang on, our company is doing better, so we may not need these other guys anymore. But that's also not fair because of the history and what Renault had to do to assist Nissan. So he mentioned that he's going to focus his efforts on Renault and try and bring the alliance to be sort of one company, or partners if you want to call it that. And this is where Nissan, and I feel a lot of things happened in the background where it became very ugly to Gozan, and this is when they started involving legal personnel to sort of investigate and, like I said, put a witch hunt on Carlos Gozan. Okay, so around that year as well, Gozan announces the alliance or a project called Alliance Move 2022, setting combined targets for Renault, Nissan, and Mitsubishi to achieve the ongoing target of annual synergies of 10 billion euros. Renault boasts a record operating profit and global sales of 3.76 million units, which is crazy. I mean, you'd never think Renault would sell that much, given that they only operate in, well, they operate in a lot less continents than Nissan, right? So they don't have any, like I mentioned, North American markets, which is a massive market for any automaker, right? So imagine them not operating there but still selling so many vehicles, right? Then in 2018, this is where the whole scandal of Carlos Ghosn getting arrested in Japan actually happened. Okay, so I'm gonna actually skip over these few years. So 2018 till current, right? There's been a whole lot of change, right? So there's new CEOs in both Nissan and Renault, and basically for the whole time when Ghosn wasn't around till I'd say a year or two ago, there was massive divide, and both sort of companies were on the decline. But now the new CEOs, Ushida and Luca De Mayo, seem to be seeing in the same sort of lens. And if you looked at the conference yesterday, right, I also put a link to that in the description. It's quite long, but you can sort of just get through it, and especially around the questions when the journalists ask questions, that's important. But if you look at that press conference and watch it, you'll notice that the tensions aren't sort of where they once were. There is an acknowledgement of this restructuring needing to happen, and I think while there is still sort of some contentious issues in the alliance, example with the amount of effort each partner needs to put into each other's programs, right? So this is important because, like I mentioned, Renault have the MPR program, Nissan have their own programs, the solid state battery being one of them. If you're one of the partners or alliances, you're not going to just go and put all of your resources into your partner, right, into the other company. You need to make sure that your own house is in order. And I think that is still a contentious issue, but I think it's a lot needs to come from Nissan, because they do have a lot more R&D capability than Renault or Mitsubishi, and I think they need to be the driving force behind the other programs. So they need to sort of set the initiative here, right? And because one of the things which one of the journalists picked up was they mentioned you can go up to, I think it's up to 15% in the MPR program. So Nissan don't necessarily have to get to that 15%. They can do 1%. But then you see where things can start to fall apart is if you don't really back your partner properly, right? If you're just doing it for the sake of it, just say, yeah, well, we are doing something, but you're not actually, putting the effort into it. So I think that's where there could be problems, right? Hoping there isn't, but only time will tell on that. The other thing which was interesting from the press conference yesterday was when certain questions were asked, or even when they were the companies themselves were doing the presentation, the initial presentations, you could see a lot of how can I put it, like smirkiness towards each other, because when certain things are brought up, I would imagine it was quite a contentious issue, building up to the conference, right? So, and you can pick that up just from the body language of the guys and sort of the giggling that was happening from the CEOs, which I thought was quite fascinating. But it's all stuff which, in all seriousness, needs to be ironed out if this is to be a successful partnership. And I think there's a lot of promise in what they're trying to do, right? But there's gonna have to be a definite buy-in from all the partners. Mitsubishi are the smallest of the partners, right? But I think if Renault and Nissan use them well, right, and give them the platform where whatever they do can sort of be projected well enough. Like for example, they do the off-road vehicles quite well, right? So the Outlander and whatever else they've been making. Nissan also operate in that sort of segment, right? Renault not so much, but maybe you sort of look at Mitsubishi as focusing on that, where they sort of specialize and do good vehicles there, and you sort of bring that to the forefront, give them a focus area to work on, because I think for where they are, they can't really go in 10 places at once. They got to be quite focused. I'm hoping that's something that happens. I'm just trying to think what else was interesting. Oh yes, so let's look at some of the fun things which came out of the conference, and that's a pledge to sort of have a lot of shared vehicles. I think there were like 6 vehicles in the immediate future which these partners work on together, on the same sort of platforms. And Renault was actually surprisingly the one that was gonna do a lot of development on these projects, and then the other companies were actually gonna use that platform and sort of have their own vehicles based off of that platform, and to share the knowledge that Renault had there, which was obviously reducing the cost for both Mitsubishi and Nissan, right? So that's something that Renault, I think, have done very well, and that shows the commitment coming from the Renault side. So if Mitsubishi and Nissan do the same in other areas, then it's bound to be a success. So let's talk a bit about the different CEOs, right? So there's Ushida from Nissan. I just want to see the Mitsubishi guy's name. It's quite a long one, or a Japanese name, which I apologize, but I'm not. Oh, it's actually a short one. Takao Kato. I hope I'm not messing that up, but I'm pretty sure in the press conference they're referring to something more respectable, like Kato-san or something to that nature. But anyway, he's quite an interesting guy. If you hear how he talks and that, he's quite an interesting guy. I think they're in good hands with this guy, so hopefully he can drive the company forward. But I think Mitsubishi is a good partner to have in this alliance, and now more than ever, when there is a restructuring happening, I think gives them an opportunity to grow, right? Because I mean, even if he heard what the CEO had to say, it seems like previously they were just sort of riding along what Nissan were doing. Sorry, they didn't really have much of a say in how things are done. They just need to make sure that their books balance at the end of the year, because the company was in a lot of financial trouble. Alright, so if we just look at the CEOs, right, and the key people that work alongside them. So we've got Kato-san from Mitsubishi. We've then got Ushida from Nissan, right? And then there's another key figure in Nissan, and that's Ashwani Gupta. So he's an Indian businessman who's been quite successful in his motor vehicle ventures. And from what I picked up yesterday, right, the Nissan CEO Luca Di Maio and Jean-Dominique Senard, I think they actually have a lot of trust in Gupta, more so than even Ushida, because a lot of what they were saying was backed up by Gupta, right? And it seemed more hesitancy coming from Ushida to, confirm what the Renault guys were saying. So I think there's a lot of value in that, and they have a lot of backing from Mr. Gupta. So that's something quite interesting, and we'll see in the months ahead if there's similar things I can pick up on that. But I think if you guys watch it, have a look at that. He's quite a clearly spoken gentleman, and I think he's a good addition as well. I think he's the CEO of Nissan. And what else can we talk about? I think we'll do another video on the vehicles because there's quite a few. But we'll do another video on some of the interesting vehicles that might come up. I'm going to try to actually get this on my computer so I can actually share the images and stuff as I go along. But cool guys, that's really what I wanted to make this video about. If you don't know, I'm a massive Renault fan. I always kept up to date with the company as a whole from when I was very young. Uh, it's the car company which I, enjoyed what they done for so many years, and I naturally just fell into the stuff they were doing and got pleasure out of it. So yes, I am a keen follower of Renault and the projects which they have, and we'll see how it goes. But thumbs up for them and for this press conference, and for putting the sort of own personal wants aside and bringing the alliance closer together. I'm hoping it works out for them in the long term. So cool guys, catch you on the next one. Thanks for viewing.